Prologue. Millie realizes she is about to be murdered while staying in a cabin during a storm. After a life-threatening cleaning job leads to a violent situation, she finds herself on the floor, slipping in blood that isn't her. Desperate to survive, she moves toward the kitchen to find a weapon, but as she reaches for a knife, she senses another presence nearby. The tension escalates as she realizes she underestimates the attacker, and the looming threat of death becomes immediate. She must act quickly to avoid becoming the next victim. Part 1. In Chapter 1. 3 months earlier, Millie cleans Amber DeGraw's luxurious penthouse, realizing Amber rarely uses her kitchen appliances. As Millie finishes up, Amber interrupts, asking her to babysit Olive while she goes for a pedicure. Despite Millie's college class looming, she reluctantly agrees. While comforting Olive, the baby mistakenly calls Millie Mama, angering Amber, who accuses Millie of undermining her as a mother. Tensions rise as Amber insists on taking Olive away, who continues to cry for Millie. The confrontation leads Millie to realize she will likely be fired for the misunderstanding, jeopardizing her job and income. In Chapter 2, walking home to her South Bronx apartment, Millie feels unsafe, clutching her purse and mace. After losing her job with Amber, she worries about affording rent and needs to find a new job quickly. As she approaches her building, a man with a scar introduces himself as a neighbor, claiming to live in the apartment below hers. Unsettled by his familiarity, Millie hastily enters her apartment, locking the door behind her. She reflects on her lost job, struggles with her past, and the difficulty of finding new work due to her history. Suddenly, she hears pounding on her door, calling her name. In Chapter 3, Millie reluctantly answers the door to Brock, her boyfriend of 6 months, who is angry she missed their dinner plans. She explains that she was fired by Amber, which Brock finds amusing, and they share a laugh. Brock offers to take her out to dinner, but Millie declines, wanting to focus on job hunting instead. He suggests moving in together to ease her financial worries, but Millie hesitates, fearing he won't accept her dark past. Despite his persuasion, she insists on needing space, leaving Brock frustrated but respectful of her wishes. She promises to think about moving in with him. In Chapter 4, Millie attends her 10th job interview, anxious about her dwindling finances. With less than $200 left, she's struggling to find work due to her criminal record, which disqualifies her from many positions. At the interview with Douglas Garrick in a luxurious penthouse, he explains that his wife Wendy usually manages the housework, but needs help due to her illness. Douglas requests that Millie use their specific cleaning products. As they discuss her background, Millie feels no romantic interest from him, which reassures her. Douglas invites her to start immediately, and she eagerly agrees. In Chapter 5, in 1964, Kitty Genovese, a 28-year-old bartender, was murdered outside her Queens apartment while 38 neighbors heard her cries, but failed to intervene. Professor Kindred explains this event as a demonstration of the bystander effect in his lecture. After class, Millie meets her boyfriend Brock, who recalls the incident and challenges the sensationalized narrative, asserting that many witnesses thought it was a lover's quarrel. They discuss Millie's new job with Douglas Garrick, CEO of Coinstock. As Brock expresses a desire for their relationship to progress, Millie feels pressured and struggles with revealing her past, especially her estrangement from her parents. In Chapter 6, it's Millie's first day working for the Garricks. She arrives at their 20-story apartment, which feels like stepping into a different era. After calling for Douglas and Mrs. Garrick with no response, she explores the living room, noticing several photos of Douglas and a woman presumed to be Wendy. A loud thump from upstairs startles her, but she decides to start the laundry in the master bedroom. To her surprise, the dirty laundry is neatly folded. As she carries it downstairs, she sees a glimpse of Wendy's green eye through a cracked door, but Wendy quickly shuts it. Millie resolves to respect Douglas's request not to disturb her. In Chapter 7, after starting the laundry, Millie heads to the kitchen to prepare dinner, following a detailed menu left on the refrigerator. The menu requires her to buy multiple ingredients from different stores, leaving her confused about terms like pâté and cornichon. 2 hours later, she has the Cornish game hen cooking and sets the dining table for Douglas and Wendy. Douglas arrives home, but mentions that Wendy won't join for dinner, stating she's unwell. Millie offers to bring Wendy a plate, but Douglas insists on taking it himself. Millie feels uneasy about the apartment and the situation. In Chapter 8, Millie meets Brock for cocktails after work, sharing her frustrations about Wendy Garrick's continued absence from her guest bedroom. Brock jokingly suggests fantastical reasons for Wendy's seclusion, such as being a vampire or a werewolf, but Millie dismisses his ideas, sensing something unsettling about the situation. She admits she has a bad feeling, but can't pinpoint why. As they chat, Brock notices her mostly full wine glass, prompting her to pretend to appreciate the expensive wine. Despite their conversation, Millie's thoughts remain consumed by the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Garrick family. In Chapter 9, Millie has been working for the Garricks for a month without meeting Wendy. As she cleans, she hears sobbing from Wendy's guest bedroom. Despite promising Douglas not to knock, she feels compelled to check on Wendy and raps on the door, but the crying stops. When Wendy answers, she coldly insists she's fine and wants to rest before shutting the door. Later, Douglas arrives, cheerful and carrying a bouquet of roses and a diamond bracelet for Wendy. Millie feels conflicted, sensing something unusual about the Garrick's situation, but struggles with whether to get involved, recalling Brock's advice to mind her own business. In Chapter 10, Millie prepares to grocery shop for the Garricks, feeling anxious about her relationship with Brock and her past with Enzo, who left her after his mother fell ill. As she shops for unusual items on Douglas's list, she reflects on her chaotic life with Enzo compared to her more stable routine now. On her way out, she encounters Xavier, the man who lives below her who seems overly familiar with her. Unsettled by his attention and her ongoing feelings of being watched, she decides that moving in with Brock might be a safer option. In Chapter 11, Millie arrives at the Garrick's penthouse, managing to bring in groceries, including cucamelons, but hears muffled shouting and a crash from upstairs. Concerned, she approaches the stairs, but is intercepted by Douglas, who appears flustered and has a tear in his shirt. He dismisses her worries about the noise, insisting she leave the groceries for him to handle. Douglas hands her a gift bag to return, emphasizing that it's her job to run errands. Millie feels a shift in Douglas's demeanor, realizing there's a darker side to him, but ultimately leaves without investigating further. In Chapter 12, Millie feels a sense of paranoia as she walks home from the subway in the South Bronx. She recalls feeling safe only in her apartment or at the Garrick's penthouse. After rejecting Brock's invitation to spend the night, she enters her building, where she encounters Xavier, the man with the scar. He attempts to engage her in conversation, suggesting she join him to watch a movie. Millie repeatedly declines his advances as they ascend the stairs. Just as she nears her apartment, Xavier grabs her arm, heightening her fear and signaling imminent danger. In Chapter 13, Xavier forcibly restrains Millie, attempting to intimidate her. When he presses against her, she uses her mace, spraying it in his face. As he screams and tumbles down the stairs, Millie fears she may have killed him. She checks his condition and sees he's still alive, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Driven by rage, she kicks him repeatedly, contemplating how far to push his injuries. Ultimately, Millie resists the urge to inflict further harm, realizing she can't return to prison. Instead, she calls 911 to seek justice for the assault. In Chapter 14, the police and an ambulance arrive at Millie's apartment after her altercation with Xavier. Despite his injuries, Xavier tries to manipulate the narrative, claiming Millie attacked him. Officer Scavo questions her, implying doubt about her story and referencing her criminal past. Millie feels frustrated and powerless as Scavo suggests her actions could be interpreted as aggressive. When Brock arrives, Millie is overwhelmed with anger and fear, realizing she might need to move due to the threat Xavier poses. Brock offers her a place to stay, prompting Millie to pack a bag as she contemplates her uncertain future. In Chapter 15, while folding laundry in the Garrick's master bedroom, Millie discovers a bloodstain on Wendy's nightgown, triggering unsettling thoughts. Her phone rings, and Officer Scavo informs her that Xavier has decided not to press charges, but warns her about the witness who saw her kick him. Scavo suggests she seek help for her anger issues, leaving Millie anxious about Xavier's release from the hospital. Douglas Garrick enters the room, prompting an uncomfortable interaction as he demands Millie hang up his jacket and questions her relationship status. Their exchange becomes tense when Douglas notices the bloodstain on the nightgown. In Chapter 16, Millie struggles to focus on dinner with Brock at a Middle Eastern restaurant, feeling increasingly unsafe since Xavier's attack. Although Brock is engaged in conversation, Millie is distracted by the sensation of being watched. Despite Brock's supportive nature, she grapples with her secrets and past. When Brock suggests they move in together, Millie agrees, not feeling ready but seeking safety away from her apartment in the Bronx. As Brock expresses his affection, Millie's unease escalates, and she turns to find not Xavier, but Douglas Garrick unexpectedly appearing on the street behind her. In Chapter 17, Millie sees Douglas Garrick crossing the street, prompting her to chase after him, questioning his presence in the East Village. He is walking with a woman who isn't Wendy, suggesting he might have a mistress. Millie witnesses their argument before they enter a brownstone apartment building. When Brock calls, Millie fabricates a story about catching up with an old friend, but her unease deepens upon spotting a familiar black Mazda with a cracked headlight parked nearby, suspecting it may be connected to her stalker. She realizes Douglas might have been following her all along, intensifying her fears. In Chapter 18, Millie prepares to move in with Brock but feels conflicted due to her past and fears about Xavier, who lives in her building. Brock drives her to the Bronx in his Audi, excited about their new living arrangement. As they arrive, they see police activity, and Millie anxiously wonders if it involves her. They witness Xavier being arrested for drug possession. Millie realizes she no longer has to move because he won't be living there anymore. However, she hesitates to commit to moving in with Brock, needing her own space and fearing he will discover her secrets. In Chapter 19, Millie arrives at the quiet Garrick penthouse and recalls finding blood on a nightgown, worrying about her job security. While cleaning the bathrooms, she discovers a bloody handprint in the sink and a trail of blood droplets leading to the guest bedroom. Despite Douglas's instructions not to disturb Wendy, she feels compelled to check on her well-being. Millie knocks on the door, and Wendy claims to be fine, attributing the blood to a cracked tooth. Insistent, Millie demands to see her. After a tense moment, Wendy unlocks the door, revealing something shocking that leaves Millie speechless. In Chapter 20, Millie is shocked to see Wendy's battered face covered in bruises of varying stages, confirming her suspicion that Wendy has been abused. Wendy insists her injuries are from a fall and her blood thinners, but Millie knows the truth. When Millie urges Wendy to go to the hospital and report the abuse, Wendy adamantly refuses, warning Millie to walk away and stay out of the situation. Wendy's fear is palpable, and she slams the door in Millie's face, making it clear she wants no help. Despite this, Millie struggles with her instinct to intervene. In Chapter 21, Dr. Kindred discusses the experiment where acclaimed violinist Josh Bell played incognito in a subway, highlighting society's indifference to beauty in unassuming settings. Millie reflects on her own willingness to help others. After class, she unexpectedly encounters Amber DeGraw, her former employer, who is out with her daughter, Olive. The meeting becomes tense when Olive calls Millie Mama, prompting Amber to hastily leave. Shortly after, Millie receives a call from Lisa at Job Match revealing her ad for a housekeeper never went live due to payment issues. She realizes the only unsolicited job offer she received was from Douglas Garrick. In Chapter 22, Millie becomes increasingly suspicious about how Douglas Garrick obtained her contact information since her housekeeper had never went live. She recalls Douglas's call about a housekeeper position and feels a sense of being watched, despite Xavier being in jail. After confirming with Douglas that she will clean that evening, she impulsively calls him with a question about how he got her number. He claims Wendy provided it, but becomes defensive when Millie asks for details. Millie decides to confront Wendy about this, determined to uncover the truth behind the situation. In Chapter 23, Millie arrives at Douglas Garrick's penthouse to deliver his dry cleaning, but her real goal is to confront Wendy. Despite the eerie silence, Millie feels compelled to check on Wendy, who has been staying in the guest room. After knocking, Millie learns that Wendy received Millie's number from Ginger Howell, raising suspicions about Douglas's involvement. Wendy reveals Douglas's abuse, including a broken wrist she falsely attributed to a fall. Despite her fear, Millie insists on helping Wendy escape. Wendy, terrified of Douglas's power, ultimately refuses and forces Millie to leave, slamming the door in her face. In Chapter 24, Millie navigates a close call with a biker while heading to the Garrick apartment. She receives a call from Brock, who invites her to dinner. Millie declines for tonight, but suggests meeting tomorrow instead, acknowledging they need to discuss their relationship. After hanging up, she contemplates revealing her past to Brock immediately, but decides to wait. Upon arriving at the penthouse, she is startled to find Wendy waiting outside the elevator. Wendy, looking serious, tells Millie, "We need to talk," indicating a pivotal moment is about to unfold. In Chapter 25, Wendy pulls Millie aside to discuss her situation. She reveals that she considered suicide, but ultimately reached out to an old friend, Fiona, who offered her a place to stay. Although Millie recognizes this is not a permanent solution, Wendy feels relieved to have a plan. Wendy asks Millie for help, specifically a ride to Albany when Douglas is away. Millie agrees to rent a car and drive her, despite the risks involved. Wendy warns Millie about Douglas's dangerous nature, but Millie reassures her that she's not afraid, even as doubt lingers in her mind. In Chapter 26, Millie rents a car for Wendy's escape. Although Wendy provides cash for the rental, Millie uses her credit card to avoid any connection to Wendy. Millie feels a lingering sense of being watched, raising suspicions about Douglas Garrick possibly tracking her movements. At the rental office, she finds that her reserved gray Ford Focus is unavailable and reluctantly agrees to take a red Hyundai instead. Despite her frustration with the rental service, Millie remains focused on helping Wendy escape and feels a desire to leave town herself amid the tension surrounding her situation. In Chapter 27, Millie drives Wendy to a motel near Albany for her escape. They plan for Fiona to pick Wendy up the next morning. Millie receives a text from Douglas confirming her cleaning schedule, which makes her uneasy about his reaction to Wendy's disappearance. While driving, Millie feels watched and notices a black Mazda with a cracked headlight behind her, suspecting it might be following them. Despite the tension, she focuses on getting Wendy to safety. When they reach the highway, Millie accelerates, only to later realize the Mazda has disappeared, leaving her confused yet relieved. In Chapter 28, Millie stops at McDonald's at Wendy's request during their drive. While Wendy is excited about the fast food, Millie receives a call from her boyfriend Brock, who is upset about her missing their dinner plans. Millie struggles with feelings of guilt and fear of revealing her secret life to Brock. She reassures him of her feelings, stating, "I love you," which he reciprocates, but she remains anxious about their future together. After the call, Millie reflects on the pressure of her relationship and doubts about whether she can maintain a normal life, given her circumstances. In Chapter 29, Millie completes the nearly 5-hour drive to a motel near Albany with Wendy, who is nervous about leaving her husband Douglas. Millie reassures Wendy that they're making the right choice and agrees to reserve the room under her name to keep Wendy safe. At the motel, Millie checks in without raising suspicion and receives the key to room 207. As they part, Wendy expresses her gratitude, but Millie feels the weight of uncertainty about their future. After Wendy enters the motel, Millie drives back home, reflecting on the potential dangers ahead from Douglas. In Chapter 30, Millie returns to the city around midnight after a long drive. She quickly drops off the rental car at Happy Car Rental just before the midnight deadline, relieved that the attendant accepts the keys without argument. Exhausted, she realizes she has no transportation back to the South Bronx and is wary of taking the subway at this late hour. As she waits on a deserted street corner, she spots a familiar black Mazda with a cracked headlight, the same car that has been following her. The driver's door swings open, leaving Millie feeling trapped and vulnerable. In Chapter 31, Millie prepares to defend herself against a figure from a familiar black Mazda. When the man reveals himself as Enzo, her former boyfriend, she initially feels joy but soon confronts him about stalking her for 3 months. Enzo explains he was acting as a bodyguard because he was concerned for her safety, especially after a recent attack by Xavier. He admits to having been there to protect her during dangerous situations. Despite their complicated history, Millie is left questioning her feelings for him as they drive uptown, where she shares the details of her day. In Chapter 32, Millie confides in Enzo about Douglas's abuse and Wendy's escape, feeling he's the only person she can trust. Enzo expresses concern for her safety, emphasizing that Douglas is dangerous and powerful. Despite Millie's insistence that she can handle herself, Enzo warns her to be cautious. They part ways with Enzo promising not to follow her anymore, but Millie is left uneasy about Douglas's potential awareness of Wendy's disappearance. As she enters her apartment, she hesitates, fearing Douglas might be waiting for her inside. Ultimately, she finds her apartment empty and secures the door. In Chapter 33, Brock offers Millie a part-time receptionist position at his law firm, which she finds appealing but worries about her past being revealed during the hiring process. As they eat dinner, Brock expresses his desire for Millie to meet his parents, intensifying her feelings of needing to disclose her secrets. Just as she prepares to tell him the truth, she receives a distressing call from Wendy, who reveals she has been brought back by Douglas. Millie prioritizes Wendy's urgent need for help over her conversation with Brock, promising to talk soon before rushing out of the apartment. In Chapter 34, Millie arrives at the dark penthouse, anxious about what she might find. Upon entering, she discovers Wendy alive but injured, with a bruise on her cheek and suspected broken ribs. Wendy reveals that Douglas found her at Fiona's farm and returned her home, shattering Millie's hope for Wendy's escape. Despite her injuries, Wendy is reluctant to go to the hospital. Millie reassures her that she will help, expressing determination to protect Wendy from Douglas's abuse. The chapter emphasizes Millie's resolve to confront Douglas and support Wendy through her trauma. In Chapter 35, Millie continues working for the Garrick family, struggling to avoid telling Brock about her past. While preparing dinner, Wendy reveals a hidden gun in a hollowed-out dictionary, expressing her desperation. Millie panics, insisting that resorting to violence is not the answer and encouraging Wendy to consider alternatives. As they discuss the gun's implications, Douglas arrives home, subtly controlling Wendy's food intake. Millie realizes Douglas's manipulative tactics are further weakening Wendy, reinforcing her resolve to help Wendy escape this abusive situation. The chapter highlights Millie's growing determination to confront Douglas and protect Wendy. In Chapter 36, Millie reflects on Wendy's desperation and considers reaching out to Enzo for help. Frustrated with her relationship with Brock, she avoids expressing her feelings despite his affectionate texts. Suddenly, she receives a late-night call from Douglas, who informs her that she will be let go, citing Wendy's desire for privacy. Millie realizes this is an attempt to isolate Wendy further. After the call, she feels uneasy about Douglas's tone when mentioning Mets tickets, suspecting he might be watching her. Feeling scared, she texts Brock, asking him to come over for support. In Chapter 37, Millie prepares for her final cleaning session with the Garricks, eager to leave Douglas behind. She plans to have an important conversation with Brock about her past, but her thoughts are consumed by Wendy's situation and the hidden gun. Suddenly, she hears a violent confrontation between Wendy and Douglas, who berates her for leaving the house and accuses her of infidelity. Millie is alarmed when a crash and Wendy's scream signal escalating violence. Hearing a gurgling sound suggests Wendy is in danger. Determined to intervene, Millie recalls the gun hidden in the bookcase. In Chapter 38, Millie retrieves the hidden gun from the bookcase, feeling conflicted about using it but determined to intervene in Wendy's situation. As she approaches the guest room, she finds it eerily silent, prompting her to enter. Inside, she sees Douglas choking Wendy against the wall, her face turning blue. Fearing for her life, Millie aims the gun at Douglas, demanding he release her. Despite her threats, Douglas doesn't respond, and Wendy's condition worsens. Millie realizes time is running out, and if she doesn't act quickly, she could lose Wendy forever. In Chapter 39, Millie accidentally shoots Douglas, who collapses and dies, freeing Wendy from his grip. Overwhelmed by the situation, Millie panics, but is relieved Wendy survived. Wendy quickly devises a plan to avoid police involvement, suggesting they can claim it was an accident since the doorman didn't see Douglas enter. Wendy insists Millie leave to protect her, urging her to delete all incriminating texts. Despite Millie's hesitation, Wendy is resolute. Millie exits the apartment for the last time, witnessing Wendy smiling over Douglas's body, solidifying the gravity of their situation and the choices they've made. In Chapter 40, Millie struggles to cope with her actions after killing Douglas, feeling guilty yet convinced Wendy will stick to their story to protect her. On the subway ride home, she shakes and reflects on the gravity of the situation. Once back in the Bronx, she sees multiple missed calls from Brock, who was concerned about their canceled dinner. Millie lies about being sick to avoid revealing the truth, feeling guilty for deceiving him. Despite Brock's caring offer to help, she declines, knowing she must handle her mess alone. She hopes to put the incident behind her soon. In Chapter 41, Millie wakes up feeling physically and mentally drained after the traumatic events from the previous night. A persistent pounding at the door reveals Detective Ramirez from the NYPD, who informs her that Douglas Garrick has been murdered and asks to question her at the station. Although not under arrest, Millie feels uneasy and requests to call her lawyer, Brock. During the call, she reveals the murder to him and asks for his help. Brock agrees to meet her at the police station, prompting Millie to reflect on the important conversation they had planned for the previous night. In Chapter 42, Millie arrives at the police station feeling anxious about her situation. Detective Ramirez drives her there, attempting small talk, but Millie remains guarded. Once inside, she finds Brock waiting for her, but he quickly reveals that she is considered a serious suspect in Douglas Garrick's murder, despite Wendy claiming responsibility. Brock informs her that the police have a warrant to search her apartment, adding to her anxiety. Millie finally confesses to Brock about her past prison record for murder, explaining it was self-defense. Brock is shocked, but reassures her that they will sort everything out. In Chapter 43, Millie is left alone in the interrogation room, panicking while waiting for Detective Ramirez. When he finally arrives with Brock, he questions her about her relationship with Douglas Garrick, pressing her about text messages exchanged from a burner phone and a bracelet found in her apartment. Millie explains the texts were work-related, but she realizes they appear suspicious without context. Ramirez reveals that Wendy claimed Millie was having an affair with Douglas and Millie's fingerprints are on the murder weapon. Millie insists she was never involved romantically with him, feeling betrayed by Wendy. In Chapter 44, Millie's interrogation deteriorates as she struggles to explain her connection to Douglas Garrick, emphasizing his abuse of Wendy and her intention to help her. Despite her efforts, Detective Ramirez remains skeptical, leaving the room and creating tension. When Brock finally speaks, he expresses disbelief over Millie's past and her alleged affair with Douglas. As he questions her about her whereabouts and her past, Millie grapples with the truth. She shot Douglas. Brock ultimately decides he cannot represent her, leaving her feeling abandoned and heartbroken as he walks out of the interrogation room. In Chapter 45, Millie is surprisingly released by Detective Ramirez, though warned not to leave town. Feeling isolated after her confrontation with Brock, she contemplates calling Enzo for help, but decides against it. Instead, she attempts to reach Wendy for clarification, but only gets voicemail. Returning home, she finds her landlady, Mrs. Randall, furious over the police search of her apartment, demanding Millie leave in a week. Exhausted, Millie discovers the news covering Douglas Garrick's murder, only to realize the man on screen is unfamiliar to her. Confusion sets in as she questions the identity of the person she shot. Part 2. In Chapter 46, Wendy reflects on her tumultuous marriage to Douglas Garrick, emphasizing that although he never physically harmed her, he was a terrible husband. She acknowledges Millie as an unfortunate casualty in Douglas's death. The narrative shifts to 4 years earlier at an art gallery, where Wendy meets Douglas for the first time. Initially baffled by contemporary art, she engages in conversation with him. Their chemistry grows as he offers her food and displays charm, revealing her intention to seduce him. Wendy's confidence builds, as she realizes manipulating him will be easier than anticipated. In Chapter 47, Wendy recalls her tumultuous relationship with Douglas 3 years prior. Frustrated by his childish behavior and refusal to get ready for a party, she insists they must attend to maintain appearances. As they prepare, Douglas's lawyer, Joe, arrives to discuss a prenup. Despite Douglas's initial reluctance to consider it, Joe warns him that without the prenup, Wendy could claim half of his assets if their marriage ends. Ultimately, Douglas reluctantly agrees to the prenup, revealing the underlying tension and distrust in their relationship as they approach their upcoming wedding. In Chapter 48, Joe Bendeck explains the prenup terms to Wendy and Douglas. The prenup offers Wendy $10 million in the event of a divorce, but limits her access to Douglas's other assets. Wendy expresses her discomfort and desire for a peaceful marriage, questioning Douglas's trust in her. Despite her emotional plea, Douglas insists that he can't marry her without the prenup, confirming Joe's influence on his decision. Ultimately, Wendy realizes the prenup would secure her future and reluctantly agrees to sign it, recognizing the uncertainty in their relationship despite her hopes for a lasting marriage. In Chapter 49, Wendy and Douglas visit a penthouse apartment that Wendy desires, but Douglas is hesitant to buy it, preferring to stay in their smaller apartment. He suggests that they should live in their house on Long Island instead. Wendy, frustrated by his stinginess and upbringing, argues for the penthouse as a dream home. She uses their potential future children as leverage, reminding him that they should enjoy their wealth. Eventually, Douglas reluctantly agrees to the purchase, seeing it as a possible tax write-off, while Wendy notes his physical changes, indicating that he still needs improvement in various aspects. In Chapter 50, Wendy enjoys a lavish lunch with her friend Audrey, who shares gossip about Ginger Howell's recent divorce from her abusive husband Carter. Audrey reveals that a woman named Millie helps women with marital issues, even providing resources and, in extreme cases, taking out abusive partners. While Wendy reflects on Douglas's annoying habits, she recognizes he would never harm her. The conversation shifts to Wendy's struggle to conceive as Audrey suggests a fertility specialist. Despite Wendy's reluctance, she agrees to get the doctor's name, planning to keep it as a potential option for Douglas's sake. In Chapter 51, 1 year earlier, Wendy prepares a simple salad for dinner at their Long Island home, prompting Douglas to express disappointment over the lack of food. Wendy tries to encourage healthier eating, but Douglas criticizes her extreme diet, suggesting it could affect her fertility. Their conversation quickly turns sour as Wendy feels blamed for not getting pregnant. After an awkward moment, Douglas leaves to get fast food from KFC, which signifies a deeper disconnect between them. Wendy realizes she can no longer respect her husband, acknowledging that they are fundamentally incompatible. In Chapter 52, feeling her marriage deteriorating, Wendy seeks retail therapy by looking for new furniture for their penthouse. She discovers that Douglas has moved in his old, unattractive furniture, which clashes with her vision for their home. While leaving to shop for antiques, she encounters Mary Beth Simons, a receptionist at Douglas's company, who offers her husband's furniture store card. Wendy is initially reluctant, but takes the card. She then insists that Mary Beth refer to her as Mrs. Garrick instead of her first name, asserting her status as Douglas's wife and emphasizing the divide in their social roles. In Chapter 53, Wendy decides to buy furniture from Russell Simons to support him and his wife Mary Beth. Upon entering the small store, she finds a stunning oak chest of drawers that she admires. Russell, the owner, greets her and impresses her with his charm and appearance, resembling the ideal version of her husband Douglas. They engage in flirtatious conversation, leading Wendy to purchase multiple pieces of furniture. As Russell writes his contact number on his business card, Wendy feels a spark and contemplates her attraction to him, realizing she desires more than just furniture from the store. In Chapter 54, Wendy reflects on her 6-month affair with Russell, feeling she may be in love with him. She contrasts Russell's qualities with Douglas's lack of ambition and self-care, recognizing her attraction to Russell's confidence and appearance. During a dinner, Wendy tries to convince Russell to stay longer, but is interrupted when her credit cards are declined, shocking her since she is married to Douglas and believes she has unlimited credit. Russell pays the bill, hinting at his own financial struggles, leading Wendy to question her finances and plan to discuss the situation with Douglas later. In Chapter 55, Wendy struggles to reach Douglas, learning her credit cards have been canceled, signaling a serious financial issue. She drives to their Long Island home, where she finds it empty and reflects on their distant marriage. When Douglas arrives, a confrontation ensues about her affair with Russell, leading to revelations about her inability to have children. Douglas suggests marriage counseling, but Wendy wants out. Tensions rise as Douglas reveals that infidelity would void her prenup benefits, hinting he has evidence against her. He cuts her off financially, leaving her feeling trapped and contemplating drastic measures against him. In Chapter 56, Wendy confides in Russell about Douglas threatening to sell their penthouse, which complicates her situation. Despite her anxiety about staying in the apartment, she hires an expert to dismantle the hidden cameras Douglas installed. Wendy fantasizes about Douglas's death, believing it would solve her financial problems tied to the prenup. As she reflects on her husband's abusive behavior, she recalls a friend's housekeeper, Millie, who helps women in abusive situations. Wendy devises a plan to manipulate Millie into believing Douglas is abusive, hoping it will lead to her freedom and a way to punish Douglas for his actions. In Chapter 57, Wendy prepares to deceive Millie by creating realistic bruises on her face, spending hours perfecting her makeup skills. She believes that for the plan to succeed, Russell must punch her to create a split lip. Initially horrified, Russell eventually complies after Wendy berates him, hitting her hard enough to cause a bloody nose. As blood drips onto the bathroom floor, Wendy feels satisfaction, realizing the injury looks convincing. This brutal act is part of her larger scheme to manipulate Millie into believing she is in an abusive relationship with Douglas, paving the way for her escape from her current situation. In Chapter 58, the plan to murder Douglas reaches its climax. Millie is left believing she killed him, while Wendy prepares to have Russell shoot Douglas with real bullets. However, Russell panics and refuses to go through with it. Frustrated, Wendy takes matters into her own hands. After a tense exchange, she confronts Douglas, who proposes a fresh start instead of divorce. Disillusioned by his naivety about wealth, Wendy pulls out the gun and shoots him in the chest, killing him. As Russell reacts in shock, Wendy confidently states her intention to frame Millie for the murder, solidifying her plan. Part 3. In Chapter 59, Millie grapples with the aftermath of Douglas's murder. Confused and overwhelmed, she reflects on the discrepancy between the man she shot and the photos of Douglas Garrick she finds online. Uncertain if she was involved in an affair, Millie feels her sanity slipping. She recalls the night she dropped Wendy off and decides to reach out to her former friend Enzo Accardi, hoping he will believe her innocence. Despite her reluctance, she contacts him, urgently requesting his help. Enzo quickly agrees to come over, signaling her last hope for support in her troubled situation. In Chapter 60, Enzo arrives at Millie's apartment, offering support after she reveals her breakup with Brock. Millie expresses her confusion about Douglas Garrick's identity, and insists that the man she shot was not the same person from the news. Enzo discovers that the Garrick's Manhattan penthouse is not their primary residence, suggesting a possible deception. Millie recounts seeing a struggle with Wendy and explains her actions, grappling with guilt over the shooting. Enzo encourages her to focus on finding the man who called himself Douglas. Millie recalls seeing him enter an apartment building with a blonde woman, sparking a glimmer of hope for uncovering the truth. In Chapter 61, Enzo helps Millie clean her apartment after the police search. While tidying up, Millie realizes her clothing from the previous night is missing, raising concerns about potential evidence against her. Enzo distracts her with humor as they discuss her recent breakup with Brock, emphasizing that she deserves someone who truly understands her. Millie acknowledges the lack of connection with Brock and confirms their relationship is over. Enzo hints at romantic feelings and they share a kiss, solidifying Millie's realization that her feelings for Enzo are genuine, marking a turning point in her emotional journey. In Chapter 62, Millie and Enzo wait outside a brownstone building to find the mystery man and a blonde woman they suspect are connected to the case. Wearing disguises of baseball caps and sunglasses, they keep watch, anxious to avoid missing anyone entering or exiting. After 2 hours without a sign, Enzo brings coffee and bagels, but Millie's focus remains on finding answers. Suddenly, Millie spots the woman from the brownstone and urges Enzo to approach her. Enzo confidently insists he can charm her into revealing information, leaving Millie both hopeful and skeptical about his plan. In Chapter 63, Millie grows anxious waiting for Enzo, who has been inside Dunkin' Donuts for too long. After watching them converse, she feels uneasy about Enzo's trustworthiness, recalling his violent past and secrets. Enzo eventually exits with the blonde woman, who is revealed to be Douglas Garrick's assistant and the wife of Russell Simons, the man Millie shot. Enzo shows Millie a LinkedIn profile picture of Simons, confirming he is alive, which brings relief but also highlights her legal troubles. Enzo decides to investigate further, asserting he knows someone who can help uncover more about Simons. In Chapter 64, Millie and Enzo return to his small studio apartment where Enzo offers her beer, which she declines due to the time. They discuss their plans, with Enzo revealing he's checking on Russell Simons' background. He learns that Russell has no prison record, but discovers an address for a second residence by a lake, which may be where Russell is staying. Millie insists they should go there to confront him, but Enzo believes it could worsen the situation. As they debate their next move, Millie receives a call from Brock, causing her anxiety to spike. In Chapter 65, Millie answers a call from her ex-boyfriend Brock, who apologizes for leaving her at the police station and warns her that police found gunshot residue on her clothing. He suggests they may be obtaining an arrest warrant. Millie panics, fearing the police will pin the murder on her despite Enzo's assurance that he will help her. She insists on confronting Russell Simons at his cabin, but promises Enzo she won't go after he prevents her from leaving. Millie decides to return to her apartment to face the police, while Enzo vows to find her a good lawyer and expresses his love for her. Part 4. In Chapter 66, Wendy and Russell celebrate in his cabin by the lake, away from reporters. She feels exhilarated after their recent actions and revels in her newfound wealth. Although Russell seems tense and occasionally references his wife Mary Beth, Wendy dismisses any concerns, believing he should be grateful for her role in their plan. As she seeks more wine, she notes Russell's lack of enthusiasm in helping her. While in the kitchen, She discovers a bottle of Pinot Noir, but suddenly notices a wide open window indicating a possible intrusion or threat to their privacy. In Chapter 67, Wendy notices an open window in the cabin, which she can't remember being open upon arrival. She shuts it, reflecting on their recent victory after Detective Rodriguez planned to arrest Millie Calloway. Returning to the bathroom, she finds Russell in the tub, crying over their actions. He expresses disbelief about killing Douglas, which confuses Wendy as she feels no remorse for the man she views as deserving of his fate. To distract Russell, she encourages him to drink more wine, hoping that alcohol will help them both forget their crime and celebrate their perceived success. In Chapter 68, Wendy enjoys a buzz from wine after celebrating Douglas's death and her impending inheritance. When her phone rings, she eagerly answers Joe Bendeck's call about Douglas's estate. To her shock, Joe reveals that Douglas changed his will, leaving everything to charity instead of her. Angered, Wendy insists he's lying, but Joe confirms he has a notarized copy. He informs her that she must vacate their properties as they will be sold. Shaken by the news, she resolves to fight for her fair share. The chapter ends with her phone ringing again. It's the NYPD. In Chapter 69, Wendy receives a call from Detective Rodriguez, who informs her that they have not located Millie, the woman accused of killing her husband, Douglas. He reveals that a security camera at the back entrance shows Douglas hadn't been in his apartment for months, complicating Millie's alleged affair. The footage suggests Wendy may be in trouble since she was present in the building when Douglas was murdered. As she considers her next steps, she rushes to the bathroom to talk to Russell, only to find him dead in the tub, bleeding from a fatal wound to his throat. In Chapter 70, Wendy discovers Russell is dead, likely murdered by Millie, who is now a dangerous threat. The power goes out, leaving her in darkness, and she realizes Millie may be inside the cabin. Wendy attempts to reason with Millie, expressing regret for framing her, but her words go unanswered. As she hears glass shatter, Wendy knows she must defend herself. She rushes to the kitchen, slipping on Russell's blood, and searches for a weapon. However, she finds nothing and hears Millie's footsteps approaching, indicating she is now in the kitchen with her, ready for confrontation. In Chapter 71, Wendy is trapped in a dark kitchen, with Millie threatening her with a knife, presumably the weapon used to kill Russell. Wendy tries to negotiate, offering financial help for Millie's education and rent, but Millie remains unresponsive. As Millie advances, Wendy realizes she has no escape route. In a moment of panic, she continues to plead for her life. A flash of lightning briefly reveals a figure, and Wendy is shocked to discover that the person approaching her with the knife is not Millie. This revelation leaves her in a state of confusion and fear. In Chapter 72, Wendy confronts Mary Beth, Russell's wife, after discovering Russell's murder. Mary Beth, fueled by rage and grief, demands Wendy write a confession admitting to the affair and the murder of her husband, Doug. As Wendy complies, she realizes Mary Beth plans a slow, painful death for her, using digoxin that Wendy unknowingly consumed in wine. Overwhelmed by nausea and despair, Wendy pleads for mercy, but Mary Beth remains resolute, vowing to ensure Wendy's death is agonizing, mirroring the suffering she caused. The chapter highlights Wendy's desperation and the dangerous consequences of her past actions. In Chapter 73, Millie reflects on her night spent sleeping in Enzo's car, avoiding police after learning they have a warrant for her arrest. Realizing she can't hide forever, she returns to her apartment where she encounters a lone police officer who asks her to come to the station for questioning but does not formally arrest her. As she rides in the police car, she checks her phone and finds numerous missed calls and messages from Enzo expressing worry about her whereabouts. After assuring him she's okay, she receives shocking news. Wendy Garrick is dead, having apparently committed suicide, leaving Millie stunned. In Chapter 74, Millie feels less intimidated in the interrogation room after hearing about Wendy Garrick's suicide, which included a confession to Douglas Garrick's murder. Detective Rodriguez informs her that surveillance footage cleared her as a suspect, revealing Wendy's deception. Although initially relieved, Millie reflects on how this experience has shaken her trust in helping others, especially women in distress. Rodriguez acknowledges her past efforts to assist victims and offers her his card, encouraging her to reach out if she encounters future danger. As she prepares to leave, she learns Enzo is waiting for her and she feels hopeful about their reunion. Epilogue. Millie reflects on her journey and the chaos surrounding the Garrick case. Now free from suspicion, she considers her past actions and the impact they've had on her life and others. With a renewed sense of purpose, she resolves to continue helping women in need, recognizing the importance of trust and community. Millie's relationship with Enzo strengthens as they navigate their future together, finding solace in each other amid the turmoil. Ultimately, she embraces the possibility of new beginnings, determined to use her experiences to foster positive change in the world around her.